He had been looking for her for 2 years, and he was looking in the wrong place again. Julian, Duke of Wexford, crossed the threshold of Lady Ashby's ballroom the way he had crossed 100 thresholds since that snowbound morning, already searching the room before his name had finished sounding from the footman's mouth. He scanned the dancers, the pillars, the gilt chairs along the wall. A woman he had met once, a woman whose name he had never learned. He had ridden to 3 counties on the strength of a laugh remembered in the dark, and tonight he expected the same as every other night. A room full of faces, none of them hers. She was sitting 6 feet away, pretending to be invisible. He did not see her. He saw a chaperone, a quiet figure in slate grey at the edge of the chairs, hands folded, eyes lowered to the 2 bright girls she was watching over. The kind of woman a man's gaze slides across, the way water slides across glass. The candlelight that caught the dancers did not reach her corner. He took in the dull gown, the smooth pinned hair, the stillness of someone whose whole occupation was not to be noticed, and his eyes moved on. And the one thing he had crossed 3 counties to find sat there and let him pass. Then she pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her finger, hard, the way a person does to keep from making a sound. He had seen that, once, in firelight across a chessboard, when he had said something foolish and she had wanted to laugh and did not let herself. The memory arrived before the recognition did. The gesture first, then the cold rush of understanding, then her face lifting half an inch, as though she had felt his attention land like a hand on the back of her neck. For the length of one held breath, their eyes met across the polished floor. She looked away first. She looked away the way a servant looks away from a master, and that small, practiced motion told him more than any introduction could have. That she had seen him, that she had known him, and that she did not intend to be known. The musicians struck up a country dance. Lady Ashby's daughters were swept toward the floor by their partners, and the chaperone rose to follow them at a discreet distance, and the Duke of Wexford stood in the middle of his hostess's ballroom, and understood that he had found her, and that she was running. He had been doing the wrong thing for 2 years. He had been looking at strangers. He had never once thought to look at the woman everyone was trained not to see. The snow had been the first thing. 2 winters past, on the worst road in Derbyshire, a broken axle had stranded him at a coaching inn called The Hart for 1 night and most of the next morning. The taproom had been full of stranded travellers, and the smell of wood smoke and wet wool. And Julian, not yet a man with a search, only a man with an axle, had taken the last seat by the fire because it was the warmest. The seat beside it was occupied by a woman with ink on the side of her hand, and a book she was not reading. He had offered her the fire. She had told him, without looking up, that the fire was a public amenity and required no man's permission to share. He had liked her at once. They had played chess for 3 hours on a warped board the innkeeper kept for slow nights, and she had taken his queen with a white knight in a move he had not seen coming, and she had said, when he protested, that a man who watches only the powerful pieces deserves to lose to the small ones. He had laughed. She had nearly laughed back, and pressed her thumbnail into her finger instead, and the firelight had caught her hair and turned it from brown to bronze, and he had thought, in the way a man thinks a thing he does not yet believe, that he could sit in this taproom for the rest of his life and consider it well spent. He had not asked her name. He had been bound that winter to a betrothal arranged before either party was old enough to object, and a man bound to one woman does not collect the names of others by firelight. It had felt, in his careful young arrogance, like a kind of honor to leave her a stranger. So they had talked until the fire burned low, and she had said she travelled at dawn, and he had said he would see her at breakfast. When he came down at dawn, she was gone. The innkeeper said the lady in grey had taken the early mail coach south and left no direction. There had been a white knight on the chessboard, set apart from the other pieces, as though placed there on purpose, and Julian had picked it up and put it in his pocket and carried it ever since. The betrothal had dissolved within the year. The lady had loved her cousin and said so, to everyone's relief but her mother's, and Julian had found himself free, and unaccountably, ferociously, unable to think of anyone but a woman he had known for one evening and could not name. He had gone back to the heart. He had described her to innkeepers from Derby to Bath. He had stood at the edge of every ballroom in London with the white knight in his waistcoat pocket. Like a man carrying a question, he had no one to ask. Now he had his answer. And his answer was retreating across Lady Ashby's ballroom in a grey gown, herding two laughing girls toward the supper room, refusing to look back. Her name, he would learn within the hour, was Miss Beatrice Vane. She was companion and chaperone to the Mrs. Ashby. She had no fortune, no family that would own her, and no intention whatsoever of being recognized. Beatrice had known him the instant he came through the door. She had known the set of his shoulders before she had let herself look at his face, and she had spent the next several minutes performing with great care the work she was paid to perform, watching the Ashby girls, gauging their partners, keeping her own eyes exactly where a chaperone's eyes belonged. It was a discipline she had practiced for 2 years and had thought herself good at. Her thumbnail had betrayed her. Old habits surfaced when the heart did, and her heart, traitor that it was, had surfaced the moment she saw that he was still looking. He was still looking. After 2 years, he was still looking. And that was so much worse than if he had forgotten. She steered her charges into the supper room and took up her station against the wall, where the heat of the candelabra could not quite reach, and a woman in grey could disappear into the shadow of a marble pilaster. From here she could see the door. She watched it the way she watched everything now, for the moment when she would need to become smaller. Vane? Lady Ashby's voice arrived before Lady Ashby did. Low, smooth, the voice of a beautiful woman who had never in her life been required to raise it. Sybil Ashby was 27 and had the kind of dark, exact beauty that made other women check their own reflections after she passed. She came to stand beside Beatrice without looking at her, her eyes on her daughters across the room. Cassandra is dancing twice with the Fenwick boy. He has 8,000 a year and a mother who breeds spaniels. It will not do. Separate them after this set. Yes, my lady. And Margaret is laughing too loudly. A girl who laughs too loudly is a girl who has not been told no often enough. Lady Ashby's gaze moved over the room and snagged, the way every gaze in the room had snagged, on the Duke of Wexford. Something in her stilled. The stillness of a hunter who has sighted larger game than she came out for. Wexford is here, she said softly. I did not expect him. He refuses everything. Her eyes narrowed with calculation. He is unmarried, you know. 2 years free of that Carstairs entanglement, and he has shown not the slightest interest in correcting it. Cassandra is the prettier of my two. If he can be brought to notice her... Shall I bring Miss Cassandra to this side of the room? Beatrice asked, because it was her function to ask such things, and because asking them kept her own voice from doing anything else. Not yet. He must come to her. A man like that is repelled by the appearance of effort. Lady Ashby turned, at last, to look at her companion. A brief, assessing flick of the eyes that took in the grey gown and dismissed it. You will keep yourself out of the way, Vane. You have a habit of standing where the light falls. Tonight of all nights, I need you invisible. Of course, my lady. It was, Beatrice thought, as Lady Ashby glided away, the single demand in her employment that she had never once found difficult to meet. Invisible was what she had become. Invisible was safe. Invisible did not have to explain why a duke had looked at her across a ballroom as though he had been waiting 2 years to do it. She had not always been Vane the companion. There had been a house in Hampshire, a father with a good name and a worse head for cards, a girlhood spent learning Greek and the pianoforte, and the comfortable assumption that the world would always have a place set for her. Then her father had wagered the place at the table, and lost it, and the strain of the losing had taken him within the 12-month, and Beatrice had discovered that a gentleman's daughter, without a gentleman's fortune, is a thing the world has no place set for at all. The kindest thing anyone had offered her was a position. Lady Ashby paid £40 a year in the use of a small cold room at the top of the house, and Beatrice had taken it, because the alternative was to be a burden on relations who could not afford her. And she had been vain ever since. The morning she fled the heart, she had had £9 in the world, and a creditor of her father's 2 days behind her on the southern road. A man who believed a debt of honour could be collected from a debtor's daughter if the debtor was past collecting. She had run because she had no choice. She had left the White Knight on the board because, well, she had told herself a great many reasons over 2 years. The true one she did not examine. Across the room, the Duke was speaking with his host, and his eyes were not on his host. They were moving, slowly, methodically, along the wall where the chaperone stood. Beatrice stepped behind the marble pilaster and made herself, as instructed, invisible. He found her in the conservatory. She had taken Margaret there to repair a torn flounce, away from the heat and the eyes, and had sent the girl back ahead of her, and had allowed herself 1 minute alone among the orange trees and the cold, green smell of growing things, before she returned to the war. 1 minute was all she ever permitted herself. She was counting the panes of the glass roof to fill it. 11, 12, 13, when she heard the door, and knew without turning whose step it was. "You are difficult to find," said the Duke of Wexford, "for a woman standing perfectly still." Beatrice did not turn. She had spent 2 years learning how not to turn. "Your Grace has mistaken me for someone. I'm Miss Vane, companion to Lady Ashby's daughters. The young ladies are in the ballroom, if you wish to be presented." "I do not wish to be presented to the young ladies." "Then I cannot think how I can be of service to you." "You took my queen with a knight," he said, "and told me a man who watches only the powerful pieces deserves to lose to the small ones. At the heart, 2 winters ago, in the snow." The orange leaves were very still. Beatrice pressed her thumbnail into her finger and held it there until the small pain steadied her, and then she turned, because a woman who would not turn would only confirm everything, and she had nothing left to her but the appearance of having nothing to confirm. He was closer than she had thought. He had grown into himself in 2 years, broader through the shoulder, his jaw harder, the careless young man at the inn replaced by a man who filled the conservatory doorway and made the orange trees look ornamental. But the eyes were the same. The eyes had been the trouble from the start. "You have me confused with another lady, Your Grace," she said, and her voice came out steady, which was the proudest thing she had done all evening. "I have never been to Derbyshire. I keep to the south. Companions do not travel." "You have ink on the side of your hand." She looked down before she could stop herself. There was a faint grey shadow along the edge of her right hand, where she had been writing out the girl's dance cards an hour before. When she looked up, he was watching her with an expression she could not afford to name. Not triumph, which she could have armoured against, but something quieter and far more dangerous. Something that looked like a man who had set down a weight he had carried a very long way. "You always had ink on your hand," he said. "You wrote in the margins of your book the whole evening, and never once read a line of it. I have spent 2 years describing that to innkeepers. The lady in grey with ink on her hand who took my queen. None of them knew you." He took a step closer. "I had begun to think I had invented you." "You should go back to the ballroom, Your Grace." Beatrice heard her own voice fracture on the last word, and despised it. "Lady Ashby's daughters are charming, and you are being missed. Whatever you think you remember, it would be a great unkindness to me to insist on it. I have a position. Positions are not given to companions who attract the attention of dukes. Please." That stopped him. She watched the word land. Please. Watched him hear what it cost her to say it, and for a moment she thought he would press anyway, because men of his rank pressed by habit. Instead, he stepped back. He turned his signet ring once with his thumb, a small, unconscious motion, and she remembered him doing it across the chessboard when he was deciding whether to risk his bishop, and her heart did something unforgivable. "I will go back," he said, "on one condition. Tell me your name, Your true one. I have carried half of you for 2 years. Let me carry the half that has a name." It was a foolish bargain, and she knew it. But the conservatory was cold and green and quiet, and no one was watching. And she was so very tired of being no one. "Beatrice," she said. "Beatrice Vane." "Beatrice," he repeated, as though testing whether the word would hold his weight. "I am Julian." "You are the Duke of Wexford?" "To Lady Ashby's ballroom, yes. To the woman who took my queen, I should like very much to be Julian." He inclined his head, not the Duke's nod, the man's bow, the one he had given her at the heart when he lost. "Good night, Miss Vane. I'm going back to the ballroom now, where I shall be insufferably attentive to my host, and shall not look at you once. You may rely on me to be completely useless to you." And he went, and he was as good as his word. For the rest of the evening, the Duke of Wexford did not glance toward the wall where the chaperone stood, not once, with a thoroughness that drew nearly as much attention as looking would have done. Beatrice returned to her station and watched the Ashby girls dance, and told herself that she had escaped. She did not believe it. A man who would describe a stranger's inked hand to innkeepers across 3 counties was not a man who could be relied upon to be useless for long. He came back the next morning. Not to the front door. Beatrice would have heard of that within the minute, and so would have all London by noon. He came to the lending library on Mount Street, where Lady Ashby sent her 3 mornings a week to change the girls' novels and her own, and where a chaperone might stand among the shelves for half an hour without anyone wondering at it. Beatrice was reaching for a 3rd volume she did not want, when a voice beside her said, "I have it on excellent authority that this one is full of dukes." She did not drop the book, which she considered another small victory. "Your Grace is following me." "I am improving my mind. The librarian will confirm it. I have asked her to recommend something edifying." He held up a slim volume. "She has given me sermons. I suspect she did not believe me either." He set the sermons down. He was dressed plainly this morning, a dark riding coat, no jewels but the signet, and in the grey library light he looked less like a duke and more like the man from the inn, which Beatrice found she resented, because it was harder to be sensible at the man from the inn. "I will not stay. I came to say one thing, and then I will leave you to your dukes. You ask me not to insist on remembering you, and I have thought about it, and I find I cannot agree to forget you. But I can agree to wait. So I am going to call on Lady Ashby, openly, with intentions everyone can see." Beatrice's stomach dropped. "Your Grace." "Toward her daughters," he went on, eyes steady on hers. "Both of them, for safety. I shall be the most eligible bore in London. I shall admire Miss Cassandra's needlework and Miss Margaret's singing, and I shall spend a great deal of time in the Ashby drawing-room being insufferable. And while I am there, being insufferable, I shall occasionally be in the same room as their chaperone, who will be obliged to remain, and we shall, what is the phrase? Become acquainted by degrees. Slowly. Properly. So slowly that not even the most vigilant mother could find fault in it." "That," said Beatrice, "is the most ill-conceived plan I have ever heard, and I once watched my father try to recover his losses by doubling his stake." "It is a terrible plan," he agreed cheerfully. "But it is a plan in which you keep your position. Your reputation remains spotless, and I am permitted to sit in the same room with you for an hour twice a week without anyone the wiser. I have weighed it against my other plan, which was to stand in the street outside the Ashby house, holding a white chess-knight until you took pity on me, and on reflection, this one seemed less likely to alarm the watch." A laugh escaped her before she could trap it. She pressed it down at once, mortified, and saw him register it. Saw the small, fierce satisfaction cross his face. The look of a man who has won a point he has been working toward for 2 years. And she understood, too late, that she had just given him exactly the encouragement she had sworn not to give. "There," he said softly. "I'd begun to think you'd forgotten how." "I have not forgotten anything, Your Grace. That is precisely my difficulty. She put the third volume back on the shelf with a snap. Do as you like, you will anyway. Dukes always do. But understand me. If your insufferable courtship of the Mrs. Ashby threatens my place in that house, I will deny the heart. I will deny the snow. I will deny that I have ever in my life played chess, and I will be very good at it. Because I have had a great deal of practice at being a person who is not there. I believe you, he said. It is the most alarming thing about you. He bowed, the man's bow again. Until Thursday, Miss Vane. I'm going to go and call on Lady Ashby and be tedious. Wish me joy. And so it began. The slowest, strangest, most ill-advised courtship in London, conducted entirely in the corners of rooms. He called on Thursday, and the Thursday after, and twice in the weeks between, and he was, as promised, insufferable. He admired Cassandra's needlework with such grave and detailed attention that Cassandra began to find him rather a trial. He requested Margaret's songs, and then sat through them with the fixed expression of a man undergoing a necessary medical procedure. Lady Ashby, watching from the best chair, mistook the whole performance for the slow advance of a fastidious man toward a proposal, and grew warm with triumph, and ordered Beatrice to keep the girls in countenance, and herself out of the way. It was, Beatrice would later admit, a wickedly clever piece of theatre, because while the Duke admired needlework and endured singing, the only conversations in that drawing-room that were alive were the ones that happened at the edges. A book of botanical engravings left open on the side table, and the Duke remarking idly that the artist had labelled a foxglove as a campanula, and Beatrice, who was supposed to be invisible in the window seat, saying without looking up that the artist had also, on the facing page, rendered an entire genus extinct through optimism. A draught from a badly hung door, and the Duke crossing to wedge it, and pausing by the window seat for the length of one sentence about the weather, but was not about the weather at all. By the fourth visit, they had a whole second conversation running beneath the first, a thing made of borrowed books and weather and the precise placement of teacups, and Lady Ashby, listening for the wrong music entirely, heard none of it. It was on the fifth visit that the inside joke was born. Cassandra had been pressed to display her Latin. Lady Ashby was determined her daughters should be accomplished, and had read out, with more confidence than accuracy, the motto on the spine of a borrowed volume, Dum spiro, spero. While I breathe, I hope, Cassandra translated, beaming. Very nearly, murmured the Duke, with such courtesy that only Beatrice, in the window seat, caught the wickedness under it. Though I have always understood that particular edition to read Dum spero, spiro, while I hope, I breathe, which is a sentiment I find I have a great deal more sympathy for these last 2 years. Cassandra, who had not the Latin to know she was being teased and her chaperone simultaneously courted, nodded sagely. Lady Ashby beamed, and Beatrice, in the window seat, bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted iron, and did not look up, and felt the joke settle between them like a coin pressed into a palm. While I hope, I breathe. A private currency now, theirs, spendable only in glances. That night, in her cold room at the top of the house, Beatrice took out the things she did not let herself look at. There were not many. A miniature of her father, a pressed sprig of something from the Hampshire garden, and, folded in a square of linen at the bottom of her workbox, carried for 2 years through every economy and humiliation, a white chess knight, the twin of the one she had left on the board, taken from a different set the innkeeper had never missed, because she had not been able, that desperate dawn, to leave the game entirely behind. She held it in her palm and thought, while I hope, I breathe, and was furious with herself, and held it anyway until the candle guttered. It would have gone on like that, corners and weather and borrowed Latin, if there had not been the matter of the Hartley concert, where Beatrice learned what it cost to be looked at in public, and the Duke learned what it cost her, and the slow, safe game took its first wound. It was a morning musicale at Mrs. Hartley's, the sort of crowded daylight affair where the marriageable daughters of the ton displayed their accomplishments to an audience of mothers and the occasional captured bachelor. Lady Ashby had brought both her girls and, of necessity, their chaperone, and had stationed Beatrice along the wall with the other companions and poor relations, where she belonged, while Cassandra waited her turn at the pianoforte. The Duke was there. He had not been expected. Lady Ashby's face when he entered held the bright, fixed pleasure of a woman whose plan is proceeding, and she moved at once to secure him a chair beside Cassandra's music. He took, instead, a chair near the wall, not beside Beatrice, a careful 3 seats distant, with a stout dowager and a potted palm between them, but near enough that when Cassandra played her piece, badly, with a determined attack on a passage plainly beyond her, the Duke and the chaperone were within a single glance of one another. Beatrice kept her eyes on her charge and did not give the glance. She had learned that much. What she had not learned, because no amount of discipline could teach it, was how to make herself unhearable. When Cassandra reached the difficult passage and faltered and stopped, scarlet, and the room held the particular cruel silence of an audience deciding whether to be kind, it was Beatrice who, without thinking, in the low, steadying voice she used to soothe the girls, murmured the next 4 bars under her breath in their correct time, not to perform, only to give Cassandra the count, the way she had given it 100 times in the practice room. Cassandra heard it, caught the rhythm, found her place, and finished. The room exhaled into applause, and a woman 2 seats down, a Mrs. Pell, who collected other people's humiliations the way some women collect china, leaned to her neighbour and said, in a carrying whisper meant to carry, "The companion prompts her. Did you hear it? The Ashby girl cannot get through a sonata without her hired woman singing it for her. One wonders what else the hired woman does for that family that the daughters cannot manage alone." It was not loud. It did not need to be. It travelled, as such things travel, in a widening ripple of turned heads and lifted fans, and Beatrice felt the whole warm room reorganize itself around the new fact that the grey woman by the wall had been noticed, and that being noticed was, for a woman like her, never anything but a wound. She kept her face still. She pressed her thumbnail into her finger until the pain steadied her. She did not look at the Duke, because to look at him now would be to confirm every cruelty Mrs. Pell had implied, and so she sat in the pillory of the room's attention and gave it nothing, which was the only weapon she had ever been allowed. The Duke rose. He did it without haste, as a Duke does everything, and he crossed not to Beatrice, but to the pianoforte, where Cassandra sat frozen, and he said, in a voice pitched for the whole room to hear, "Miss Ashby, that is the most difficult passage in the entire piece, and I have heard it murdered by professionals at the Hanover Square Rooms who were paid a great deal more than nothing to leave it intact. You recovered it. That is a rarer accomplishment than playing it cleanly. Anyone can play what they have rehearsed. Only the composed can rescue what goes wrong in front of 300 people." He let that settle. Then, turning, mild as milk, addressing the air a foot above Mrs. Pell's head. "And I had always understood that a lady of true musical feeling counts the time when she listens, the better to follow. I do it myself. I find one is less likely to embarrass oneself by mistaking a recovered passage for a failed one." He inclined his head to the room at large. "Pray continue. Who is next?" It was beautifully done. He had defended Cassandra without naming the slight, rebuked Mrs. Pell without acknowledging her, and turned the room's attention from the chaperone to himself so smoothly, but within a minute the musicale had resumed, and the ripple had closed over as though it had never been. Mrs. Pell sat with her fan, very still, defeated, and the next young lady took the pianoforte, and Lady Ashby glowed with the reflected credit of having a duke leap to her daughter's defence, and Beatrice, against the wall, understood 3 things in quick and terrible succession. The first was that he had saved her. The second was that he had had to disguise the saving as a defense of Cassandra, because a duke who rose to defend a companion would have ended her in a sentence. The third the one that frightened her, was that he had been willing to spend his own dignity in a crowded room rather than let her sit 1 minute longer in the pillory, and that a man who would do that, quietly, taking none of the credit, was a far more dangerous thing than the careless young man at the inn had ever been. She caught him, once, on the way out, in the press by the door where Lady Ashby was retrieving her wraps, 3 words under her breath, not looking at him. "You should not." "I know," he murmured, equally low, equally fixed on the middle distance. "I have a great deal of dignity. I can afford to spend some of it badly. You cannot afford to spend any of yours at all. So I shall spend mine, and you shall keep yours, and that is the only fair division of labor I can think of." A pause. "Count the time, Miss Vane. I find it steadies one." And he was gone into the bright street, before she could decide whether she wanted to weep or laugh. And so she did neither, which was its own small mastery, and rode home beside Lady Ashby, listening to the lady plan a wedding to the wrong daughter. The slight had a long tail. Mrs. Pell's whisper did not die at the door. It went out into the drawing rooms and acquired detail as it travelled, until by the week's end, the version in circulation had the Ashby companion not merely prompting Cassandra, but running the entire household, a sort of grey eminence who had made herself indispensable and was, some said, growing above her station. Lady Ashby heard the talk and disliked it, and her dislike settled, as such things do, on the nearest available object, which was Beatrice, who found her duties suddenly multiplied, her half-days curtailed, her every small liberty reviewed. It was the emotional debt of the whole affair, accruing quietly. The Duke had spent his dignity to spare her 1 bad minute, and the world had repaid her for being spared by making her smaller. She did not blame him. She understood, with the flat clarity of long practice, that the fault was not his and not hers, but simply the shape of the world she lived in. A world in which a woman in grey could be saved, or could be safe, but never, it seemed, both at once. The proximity did its slow work, as proximity will. There came a wet Tuesday when Lady Ashby and her daughters went out in the carriage to return calls, and Beatrice was left behind with a headache that was 3 parts genuine and 1 part strategic. And the Duke of Wexford, arriving for a call he had been told would find the house empty of all he was supposed to want, was shown by a confused footman into a drawing room containing only the chaperone. "This is improper," Beatrice said, rising. "Extremely. I'll leave the door open and stand a respectable 8 feet away, and we shall both swear, if asked, that I came to return a book." He produced, from inside his coat, the volume of botanical engravings, the one with the libelled foxglove. "Which I have, as it happens, actually done, so we shan't even have to lie." He did not sit. He stood by the door, as promised, hat in hand, and for a moment neither of them performed anything, and the silence was the honest kind, the kind they had had at the inn before they had anything to lose. "You look tired," he said at last, not as a courtier says it, as a man notices a thing about someone he watches. "I'm a companion to 2 young ladies in their first season. I'm required to be awake whenever they are interesting, which is to say, at all hours. Is she kind to you, Lady Ashby?" Beatrice considered the question, and the danger of answering it honestly. "She is not unkind. She is efficient. I am a thing she has purchased that performs a function. One does not expect kindness from one's umbrella." She heard how it sounded, and amended it, because she did not want his pity, which was a thing she could not afford and would not survive. "It is a position. There are far worse ones. I have a roof and £40 a year, and a great deal of practice at being content with less." "You took my queen," he said, "with a knight." "You keep saying that. Because it is the most important thing I know about you, and you keep trying to convince me you are an umbrella." He turned the signet ring with his thumb. The woman at the heart was the cleverest person I had ever sat across a board from. She told me I deserved to lose. She was right. I have lost a great deal since, mostly on purpose, mostly because losing seemed the only thing left worth doing with skill. His voice had dropped, the banter gone out of it like heat out of a room. I let you go without your name because I thought I was being honorable to a woman I was bound to. I went down to breakfast, certain you would be there. You were not there. And I have spent 2 years learning that the cleverest move on the board is the one you don't make in time. Beatrice's chest had gone tight. This was the moment to be cruel, to deny the heart, to send him off, to protect the small grey safety she had built. She opened her mouth to do it. I left a knight on the board, she said instead. I have its brother in my workbox. I've carried it for 2 years and told myself a dozen reasons why, and not one of them was the true one. She pressed her thumbnail into her finger, hard. There. Now we are even. We have each confessed to carrying a wooden horse about the country like sentimental fools, and we can neither of us pretend the snow did not happen. Are you satisfied? No, said the Duke, with great gentleness. But it is the happiest I have been in 2 years, so I find I can wait to be satisfied. He left before the carriage returned. He took the foxglove book with him by mistake and sent it back the next morning with a note that said only, in a hand she would have known anywhere, "While I hope, I breathe." And a postscript. The artist has now extinguished the campanula also. Pray inform Miss Cassandra her motto stands corrected. Beatrice read it 4 times and laughed aloud in her cold room, alone. The first laugh she had let herself have in 2 years that no one was permitted to see. There was one more morning that mattered, before the trouble. A small one, the kind that leaves no mark on anyone watching, and changes everything for the 2 people inside it. It was raining again, the soft, persistent London rain that turns the streets to pewter, and Lady Ashby had taken the girls to a fitting and left Beatrice to copy out the invitations for the ball, 300 of them, in her good, clear hand, at the writing desk in the morning room. The Duke had come, ostensibly, to return a book. There was always a book. They had worked through half the lending library's natural history shelf by now, and the foxglove that ought to have been a campanula had become a whole private taxonomy of errors they catalogued between them. And the footman, grown used to him, had shown him in without ceremony and gone back to his pantry. He kept no careful 8 feet away this time. He came and stood at her shoulder and looked down at the rows of names in her even script, and was quiet for so long that she finally set down her pen. "You write a beautiful hand," he said. "I write 300 invitations to a ball. I will spend standing against a wall. It is the only beautiful thing about the arrangement." She flexed her cramped fingers. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Because there is ink on the side of your hand," he said, "and I have spent 2 years describing it to strangers, and it occurs to me that I have never once been permitted to simply look at it." And before she could decide whether to forbid it, he took her hand, the right one, the inked one, and turned it over in both of his, gently, as though it were one of the small chess pieces, and ran his thumb once along the faint grey shadow at the edge of her palm, where the ink always settled. It was not improper. A man may take a woman's hand, but neither of them had touched the other since a chessboard 2 winters gone, and the schooled, flat calm Beatrice had built over 2 years came apart at the seam of that single contact. The warmth of his hands around her cold one, the rough catch of a horseman's callus against her knuckle, the absolute stillness of the rainy room. She felt her own pulse in her wrist, where his fingers rested, and knew that he felt it too, because his thumb went still on her palm, and neither of them breathed, and the rain came down, and the whole of the careful corner courtship, all those weeks of weather and Latin and 3 feet of decorous distance, narrowed to the 4 square inches of skin where his thumb lay against her hand. "You should not," she whispered. It was becoming, she thought distantly, the only thing she ever said to him. "I know." His voice had gone rough. He did not let go. Tell me to stop, and I will. I have been very obedient. I obeyed you at the concert. I shall obey you now, the instant you ask." A pause, while the rain filled it. "But you have not asked." She had not. That was the unbearable thing. She stood at the edge of 2 years of discipline, with her hand in his, and the word "stop" sitting plain and easy on her tongue. And she could not make herself spend it, because to send him away from this one small warmth was more than she could do, and to keep it was more than she could afford. And so she did the cowardly, merciful thing, and said nothing at all, and let her hand stay where it was for the length of 3 more breaths. It was the footman's step in the passage that broke it, not either of them. He released her hand and stepped back to his proper distance, the half-second before the door opened. And by the time the footman entered with a message about the fittings running late, the Duke of Wexford was standing by the window, remarking on the rain, and the chaperone was bent again over her invitations. And the only evidence that anything had happened at all was the small smear of fresh ink she had laid across the corner of the Marchioness of Tavistock's name, where her hand had trembled. When the footman had gone, the Duke said, very low, not turning from the window, "I shall remember that until I die. I want you to know it. Whatever happens, whatever you decide I am or am not to be to you. I held your hand in the rain on a Tuesday, and you did not send me away. And that one Tuesday is worth more to me than every season I spent looking at strangers." Beatrice dipped her pen and wrote out the next name with a hand that had, by sheer force of 2 years' training, stopped trembling. "Go home, Julian," she said gently, "before the footman comes back and finds you have stopped pretending to look at the rain." He went, but at the door he paused and said the Latin one, soft as the rain itself, "While I hope, I breathe," and was gone before she could answer, which was as well, because she had no answer that would have been safe to give. She proved her worth a fortnight before the ball, on a night that nearly undid the Ashby family, and the Duke saw her do it. And afterward, he stopped trying to convince her she was clever, and started trying to convince her she was brave, which she found far harder to argue against. It was the younger daughter who did it. Margaret, 16, soft-hearted, and persuaded by everyone, including herself, that to laugh too loudly was her gravest fault, had been receiving notes. Beatrice, whose business was to know things before they became catastrophes, had marked the change in the girl a week earlier. The new habit of slipping to the window at the sound of horses, the bloom that came and went in her face, the borrowed novel, suddenly full of pressed flowers it had not contained before. She had said nothing, because a chaperone who accuses without proof is dismissed within the hour, and had instead simply watched, the way she watched everything, and waited for the night the matter would declare itself. It declared itself at a card party at the Phoenix, where the company was large and the supper long, and a chaperone might lose sight of a soft-hearted girl for the quarter of an hour it takes to ruin her. Beatrice lost sight of Margaret at 11:30. She found, on the chair where the girl had been, a folded note that had slipped from a reticule, and the note, in a flowing, dishonest hand, named the hour and the garden gate, and a post-chaise waiting in the mews, and was signed with the initial of a man Beatrice knew by reputation, a Mr. Crail, handsome as a fallen angel, and twice as bankrupt, who had run through 2 fortunes and was hunting a third, and who had selected Margaret Ashby not for her dowry, which was modest, but because her mother's vigilance was all spent on the elder sister, and the younger could be had cheap. Another woman might have screamed for Lady Ashby. Beatrice did not. She understood in the space of a breath that an alarm raised in a crowded card party would ruin Margaret as surely as the elopement itself, that the only way to save the girl was to make sure no one ever knew there had been anything to save her from. So she rose, smiling, told the nearest matron that Miss Margaret had felt faint and gone to lie down, and walked, not ran, running is noticed, through the house and out a side door into the cold mews, where a post-chaise indeed stood waiting with its lamps hooded, and Mr. Crail at the open door of it, and Margaret, half in and half out, white-faced, her courage failing now that the romance had become a vehicle and a dark lane. The Duke of Wexford had followed her. He had seen the note slip, had seen Beatrice's face change, had risen when she rose, and trailed her through the house at a distance. Not to interfere, he would tell her after, but because a woman who walks out of a card party with that particular stillness in her shoulders is a woman walking toward trouble. And he had spent 2 years unwilling to let her walk toward anything alone. He arrived at the mouth of the Mews in time to see what she did, and what she did, he never forgot. There were no tears, no pleading, no raised voice. She walked up to the chaise, into the small pool of its hooded light, and she said to Mr. Crail, in a voice of such flat, unhurried calm, that it stopped the man's practiced smile cold, "Miss Ashby has changed her mind. You will help her down." "I think," said Crail, recovering, the charm sliding back over his face like oil over water, "that the lady is of an age to know her own mind, and that a paid companion is in no position to—" "You ran through the Latimer fortune in 18 months, Beatrice said, conversationally, as though discussing the weather. "And the Greville settlement in less. There is a tailor in Conduit Street who has sworn to have you taken up for debt the moment you set foot in his parish, and a man in Bruton Street who holds your note for £400 and has lost patience. You have selected Miss Ashby because her dowry, though small, is liquid, and because her mother watches the wrong daughter. You have miscalculated in exactly one particular." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You assumed the household had no one in it who pays attention. Help her down, Mr. Crail, and drive on to wherever you imagine you can still go, and I will give you until morning before I lay your note for £400 before the only man in London who frightens you more than the tailor does. And you know which man I mean, because I can see by your face that you do." It was a bluff, in part. She held no such note, and never had. But it was a bluff built on 2 years of standing in corners, listening to what people said when they thought no one who mattered was in the room. And it was constructed of true facts, assembled into a structure that left Crail no exit he could see, in the dark of a mews, with a duke's shadow filling the lane behind him. He looked at the chaperone. He looked, past her, at the duke, and he calculated, as such men always calculate, that there was nothing here worth the £400, and he handed Margaret down with a flourish that pretended it had been his own idea, and climbed into the chaise alone, and was driven off into the dark and out of the story. Beatrice caught Margaret as the girl's knees gave way, and held her, and murmured the 4 steadying bars she would have murmured at the pianoforte, and over the girl's shaking head, she met the eyes of the Duke of Wexford across the cold mews, and neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing to say that would not be smaller than what he had just watched her do. He spoke of it once, days later, in the drawing room, low, while Cassandra murdered a song. "You were magnificent," he said. "You were also entirely without authority, without rank, without a single thing to back the bluff, and you walked up to a desperate man in the dark and routed him with £400 you do not possess. I have commanded men who would not have done it." "I have an advantage your commanded men lack," Beatrice said, not looking up from her work. "I have nothing further to lose. A woman with nothing to lose is the most formidable creature in any room, Your Grace. It is the one power they cannot take from me by taking my position. I learned it the morning I had £9 and a creditor 2 days behind me. You learn a great deal when you have nothing, about what frightens men who have everything." He was quiet a moment. Then, "Does Lady Ashby know what you did for her daughter?" "No, and she never will. If she knew, she would have to be grateful, and gratitude to a companion is intolerable to a woman like her. It would make me a person, and persons must be reckoned with, and umbrellas need not be. Margaret is safe, the family is unscathed, and no one will ever know there was a danger. That is the whole of what I was hired for, Your Grace. I keep the catastrophes from happening, and the reward for keeping a catastrophe from happening is that everyone agrees it never could have." She set a final stitch. It is, on the whole, the most satisfying work I have. No one sees it. That is the point of it. It is the one thing I do entirely for its own sake, because there is no one to do it for. There is now, he said quietly, and turned the signet ring with his thumb, and said nothing more, because Cassandra had reached the difficult passage, and the whole room was, mercifully, looking elsewhere. The trouble, when it came from the quarter she had least guarded. It was the Ashby Ball, the great event of Lady Ashby's season, 300 candles and a supper of lobster patties, and the entire marriageable ton crammed into the long drawing rooms of the Grosvenor Square house. Beatrice had been on her feet since dawn, arranging flowers and soothing dressmakers and writing place cards, and by the time the guests arrived, she had folded herself into her accustomed corner with the particular exhaustion of a person who has built a party she is not permitted to enjoy. The Duke of Wexford arrived late, as dukes may, and Lady Ashby received him with the radiant certainty of a woman who expects an offer for her daughter before the week is out. She had reason for her certainty. That very afternoon, a friend had told her, in confidence, that Wexford had been seen at the Mount Street Library 3 mornings running, and at a lending library, a duke does not loiter for sermons. He was courting in secret, the friend said. He was reading up. It could only be Cassandra. It was the word secret that undid everything. Because Lady Ashby, turning the intelligence over through the long afternoon, had begun to wonder. A duke who wished to court Cassandra openly need not skulk in libraries. He need only call, as he had been calling, and declare himself. Why the secrecy? Why the libraries, the borrowed books, the long, flat conversations conducted with such apparent indifference? And why? The question surfaced like a splinter working its way up through skin. Why, on every one of his visits, had the Duke contrived to spend a portion of his time near the window seat, where her companion sat? Lady Ashby was beautiful and controlling, and a great many things Beatrice had reason not to admire. She was not stupid. By the time her ball was in full and glittering progress, she had assembled the truth from a dozen small pieces and was carrying it about the room like a held breath, watching. She watched the Duke greet his host. She watched him admire, with his customary tedium, a spray of hothouse roses. She watched him decline to dance with Cassandra on the grounds of a turned ankle that had not troubled him on the stairs. And she watched him, in an unguarded moment between sets, let his eyes travel, just once, just for the space of a heartbeat, to the corner where a woman in grey stood counting the windows. That was all. One look. But Lady Ashby had built her whole life on reading rooms, and she read this one, and her beautiful face went very still. Beatrice felt it before she understood it, the way the air changes before a storm. She saw Lady Ashby cross the room toward her, smiling, and she knew the smile, and she pressed her thumbnail into her finger and stood her ground because there was nowhere left to go. "Vane." The voice was honey. "You look unwell. The heat, I expect. Come away from the crowd a moment." A hand closed on Beatrice's elbow, gentle as a manacle, and steered her through a side door into the small anteroom where the card table stood empty, and the door clicked shut, and the honey was gone. "How long," said Lady Ashby, "has the Duke of Wexford been making a fool of me in my own drawing room?" "My lady, do not. I have watched you both for an hour. I watched him decline my Cassandra to spare an ankle and then walk across the room without a limp. I watched him look at you." Her voice did not rise. It sharpened, which was worse. "I took you in, Vane. I gave you a position where no one else in England would have you. A gentleman's daughter with a ruined name and a card sharp's debts hanging round her neck. I housed you. I paid you. And in return, you have been carrying on a clandestine intrigue with the one man I had marked for my daughter, under my own roof, on my own time." "There is no intrigue." It was almost true. "I have never been alone with him by design. I have never encouraged—" "You have a face that encourages," Lady Ashby said, and the contempt in it was total. You think because you dress grey and stand in corners that you are invisible. You are not. You are precisely the kind of woman that ruins houses. The quiet kind, the clever kind. The kind a man notices because she is trying not to be noticed. I will not have it. Do you understand me? I will not have my daughter's prospects sacrificed to a companion's vanity. Beatrice held very still. What do you wish me to do, my lady? You will leave this house tonight, after the ball, so as to cause no talk. You will be gone before the family rises. I will write you a character. The smallest pause, calculated, cruel. Or I will not, depending on whether you can be relied upon to disappear as quietly as you came. There are positions in the north, in Scotland. A woman of your attainments and your discretion might do very well in a household where there is no eligible gentleman within 40 miles. I will make inquiries. Or, and here she let the alternative hang, sweet and rotten. You may stay, and explain to the Duke when next he calls that you find his attentions disagreeable, and convince him of it so thoroughly that he troubles this family no more. Convince me, Vane, that you can be relied upon. Then we need not speak of Scotland. It was a choice that was not a choice. Stay and crush the one good thing she had let herself have, and do it so convincingly that he would never doubt her cruelty. Or go, north, alone, to a household at the edge of the world, where no man would ever look at her across a board again, which was perhaps, she thought with a calm that frightened her, the safer thing after all. I will give your ladyship my answer in the morning, Beatrice said. You will give it to me now. No. The word came out steady, and Beatrice was almost surprised to hear it. You have offered me a choice. A choice deserves a night's thought. I have served this family faithfully for 2 years, and I have never once given you cause. I have written your cards, and soothed your dressmakers, and kept your daughters in countenance. And I have done it well, and you know I have done it well, because you have never once had to do it yourself. You may dismiss me, that is your right. But you will not make me decide my whole future in the corner of a card room while 300 people eat your lobster patties on the other side of that door. I will answer you in the morning. Lady Ashby stared at her. For one moment something moved behind the beautiful, exact face. Surprise, perhaps, or the dim recognition that the umbrella had a spine. And then it closed over again. The morning, then, she said, and not a word, not a glance, not so much as a breath in his direction for the rest of this night. If he so much as nods at you across that room, the offer of a character dies with the candles. Do you understand me, Vane? Perfectly, my lady. She had to find him. She had to find him and warn him to stay away from her for the rest of the evening, or Lady Ashby would carry out every threat she had made, and a few she had not yet thought of. Beatrice slipped back into the ballroom with her heart going like a trapped bird, and her face arranged into the careful nothing of 2 years' practice. And she scanned the crowd for the one set of shoulders she could find in any room. He was watching for her. Of course he was. The moment she emerged, he began, with the slow inevitability of weather, to move toward her. And she felt 300 eyes that were not on either of them, and one pair, Lady Ashby's, from across the room, that was on nothing else. She could not speak to him. She could not be seen to speak to him. But she could not let him come. So she did the only thing she could think of, which was to walk past him, close, on her way to the supper room, and to say without turning her head, in the flat, low voice a chaperone uses to a footman, 6 words, barely louder than breath. Do not look at me. Please. She felt him check beside her. She felt him understand. Felt his whole posture change as the man who read boards read this one. And she walked on toward the supper room without breaking stride, leaving him standing in the middle of the ballroom, doing, with visible effort, absolutely nothing at all. It was the kindest thing she could do for him, and it felt like the cruelest thing she had ever done in her life. It cost him everything to obey her. The Duke of Wexford stood in Lady Ashby's ballroom, and did not look at the woman walking away from him. And the not looking was the hardest physical act he had performed since he had come down to breakfast at the Hart and made himself walk out the door without first checking the taproom one more time. He understood enough. 6 words in a flat voice and a face like a closed shutter, and Lady Ashby across the room with the particular bright stillness of a woman who has discovered something and means to use it. He had been careless. He had let his eyes go to the corner once, just once, and once had been enough, and now Beatrice was paying for it, as she had always told him she would. He made himself dance with Cassandra. He made himself eat a lobster patty. There was a man named Fenwick who said something, and the Duke made himself laugh at it, and admire the flowers a second time, and leave at a respectable hour with a respectable bow, and the whole performance was ash in his mouth. Because somewhere in that house, a woman who had carried a wooden horse for 2 years was being made to choose between her livelihood and the one thing she had let herself want. And it was his fault. And he could do nothing, because anything he did would make it worse. At home he did not sleep. At the window of his study, he stood, turning the white knight over in his fingers, thinking about the cleverest move on the board being the one you don't make in time. And somewhere near dawn, he resolved that he would not make that mistake twice. Once already he had let her go, out of a misplaced sense of honor to a bond that did not deserve it. To let her be sent to Scotland now, out of his own cowardice, was a thing he found he could not contemplate, whatever it cost, and through the long grey hours he had begun to reckon what it might cost. He would not let her disappear again. But when he called at the Ashby house the next afternoon, with his resolve hard and bright inside him, the footman told him the family was not at home, and when he called the day after, the answer was the same. And on the 3rd day, the under-housemaid, who had a sweetheart in his stables and a soft heart besides, slipped him a folded paper as he turned away from the door, and the paper, in a hand he knew, said this: "You owe me nothing. The fault was mine for letting myself be seen to hope. I have taken a position in the north, and am gone before you read this. Do not look for me. You are very good at not looking. You proved it at the ball, and I have never in my life been more grateful to anyone for anything. Be useless to me one last time. B.V." Beneath the signature, pressed into the fold of the paper, was a white chess knight. Julian read it, standing on the Ashby doorstep, with the door already closing behind him, and the bottom went out of the world. This was Beatrice's dark hour, and it had begun before the Duke's. She had not slept either, the night of the ball. She had sat in her cold room and turned Lady Ashby's choice over and over, and somewhere in the small hours she had understood that there was no version of staying that did not end in his ruin or hers. If she stayed and rebuffed him, she would have to be cruel enough to convince him, and she had seen what 2 years of believing himself unworthy had done to him already. She would not be the woman who confirmed it. And if she stayed and did not rebuff him, if she let the slow corner courtship continue under Lady Ashby's now open eyes, it would end in scandal, and a duke survives scandal, and a companion does not. He had told her he would not let her disappear. She believed him. That was the trouble. A man who would not let her disappear would, in trying to save her, destroy her, because the only thing that kept a woman in her position safe was precisely that no one of his rank ever looked. He had only ever wanted to keep her, she told herself, in the flat grey light before dawn, and keeping her would unmake her. He had courted her in corners because he liked the secrecy, and the secrecy had been the danger all along. He had carried a wooden horse about the country because a duke can afford to be sentimental, and she could not. She made herself say it plainly, the worst of it, the thing she did not believe, and made herself believe anyway. He had wanted the woman from the inn, the clever stranger in the snow, the puzzle. And the puzzle was the thing he loved, not the grey woman who would have to live with the wreckage when his attention moved on. He had never once had to count the cost of looking at her. She had counted nothing else for 2 years, so she had risen before the household and packed her small box and gone down to Lady Ashby's writing room while the house still slept, and accepted the position in the north. A clergyman's family near Inverness, 6 daughters and a damp glebe, and no eligible gentleman within 40 miles. Exactly as advertised. Lady Ashby had written her a character after all, cool and correct, and had not looked up from her desk as she handed it over. "You are wiser than I gave you credit for, Vane," she had said. "A clean disappearance. I will tell anyone who asks that you went to nurse a sick relation." "There is no relation," Beatrice had said. "There is no one. That is rather the point of me." And she had taken the character and gone up to write her note to the Duke, and had pressed the second white knight into the fold because she could not, even now, even at the end, leave the game entirely behind. And then she had taken the early mail coach north, as she had once taken the early mail coach south, running from a thing she could not afford to want. It was on the second day of that northward journey, somewhere past Grantham in the rain, that Beatrice understood she had got it wrong. She had been telling herself the story of the puzzle, that he loved the stranger, not the woman, the snow, not the grey. And she turned it over once too often, and it cracked. Because the man at the lending library had not been courting a puzzle. He had asked if Lady Ashby was kind to her. He had noticed she was tired. He had stood 8 feet away with the door open and confessed that the cleverest move on the board is the one you don't make in time. And there had been no puzzle in his face when he said it. Only a man looking at her as though she were the answer and not the question. She had built the lie because the lie let her run, and running was the only skill she had perfected. And she had run from the one man who had ever, in 2 years or 20, actually seen her standing in a corner, trying not to be seen. But the mail coach goes north, whether you have changed your mind or not. And a companion with £9 and a clergyman's offer does not turn it around on a whim. And pride is a poor travelling companion, but a tenacious one. And Beatrice Vane went on to Inverness, because she did not believe, even then, that a duke would come. He came. It took him 11 days. The under-housemaid did not know where she had gone, only that it was north. Lady Ashby would not say. And Julian, who had spent 2 years failing to find one woman in 3 counties, discovered that he was very much better at the search when he had a name to ask after. He traced her through the coaching inns, the way he had once meant to trace her and never could. The lady in grey, travelling alone, north. And at every stage, the answer came a little fresher. And at Perth, a hostler remembered her clearly. And at the last, he rode the final miles himself in the rain, because the mail was too slow. And he came up the glebe road to a square grey manse, with 6 children's faces at the windows and a damp garden. And Beatrice Vane was on her knees in that garden in the rain, planting something, because the clergyman's wife had asked her to, and because work was the only thing that had ever quieted her. She heard the horse and did not look up. Companions did not look up at horses. Horses were not their business. She heard it stop. She heard a man dismount and boots on the wet gravel, and still she did not look up, because she had become very good at not looking, and because she was afraid of what would happen to her if she looked and it was him, and equally afraid of what would happen if she looked and it was not. "You," said the Duke of Wexford, standing in the rain at the edge of a clergyman's vegetable garden 400 miles from London, "are extremely difficult to find, for a woman who keeps leaving me chess pieces." Beatrice's hands had gone still in the wet earth. "Companions do not receive callers, Your Grace." "I have not come to call. I have come to make a complete spectacle of myself in front of 6 children and a clergyman, and I should warn you that I intend to do it whether you stand up or not, so you may as well stand up and watch." He came around the low wall and stopped a few feet from her, hatless, his coat dark with rain. And he did not look like a duke at all. He looked like the man from the inn, soaked to the skin and entirely without dignity, and perfectly, fiercely happy. "I have something of yours. 2 things, in fact." He held out his hand. On his palm sat two white chess knights, side by side. You keep leaving the small pieces behind. I've begun to think you do it on purpose, so that I will have to follow. Beatrice rose slowly, her skirts heavy with rain and earth, her hands trembling and not from the cold. You should not have come. I am aware. You wrote me a very clear letter. You told me to be useless to you one last time, and I tried, Beatrice. I genuinely tried. And I discovered that I have used up my entire lifetime's capacity for being useful to you in one night at a ball, and I have none left. His voice was not light now. The rain ran off his jaw. Listen to me. I have ridden 400 miles to say one thing, and I am going to say it badly because I have never said it before. You think I wanted the woman at the inn, the stranger, the puzzle. You think when the puzzle was solved I would lose interest, and a duke can afford that, and a companion cannot. And so you ran north to spare us both. I read it in your letter. The fault was mine for letting myself be seen to hope, as though hope were a fault, as though you were a thing I would tire of. Aren't I? Beatrice's voice broke clean in two. You like a clever woman across a board, Julian. There is no board here. There is mud and 6 children, and a damp glebe, and a woman of 26 with a ruined name and £40 a year. Look at me. I am exactly what Lady Ashby said I was. The quiet kind. The kind a man notices because she is trying not to be noticed, and the noticing fades. And then there is only the quiet. And I cannot, I will not, survive being noticed and then forgotten a second time. I survived it once. I left you a night on a board and ran, and it took me 2 years to... She stopped. 2 years to what? To stop hoping, she whispered. And I'd only just managed it. And then you came through a door. The Duke crossed the last of the distance between them. He did not touch her. He stood close enough that she could see the rain on his lashes and the white knights still in his open hand. And when he spoke it was low and steady, and without any of the banter that had been their armor for weeks. I have not come because you are clever, though God knows you are. I have not come because you are a puzzle. You are the least puzzling thing in my life. You are the only thing I have ever been certain of. I came down to breakfast at the Hart certain you would be there, and you were not. And for 2 years I have been a man walking into rooms certain you would be there. Tonight, 11 days ago, I walked into a room and you were there, in a corner, trying not to be seen. And I want to tell you something about that moment, Beatrice. He drew a breath. I did not love you because you were the stranger in the snow. I loved you when you pressed your thumbnail into your finger to keep from laughing at a ball, because that was when I knew the woman in the corner and the woman at the inn were the same woman, and that I had spent 2 years looking for one of you when I could have been loving both. The rain fell. Somewhere in the manse, a child was singing. Beatrice stood in the wreck of the clergyman's vegetable patch, with mud to her wrists, and tears she would not have called tears, running down with the rain. And she understood that she had run 400 miles from the only man who had ever looked at the corner and seen a person standing in it. Say it again, she said. The Latin one. The way you say it. His face changed, the banter coming back, but gentler now, the private currency spent at last in the open. While I hope, said the Duke of Wexford, I breathe. I have your queen, Beatrice said unsteadily. In my workbox. I took it from the inn. Not the night I left for you. I took your white queen, because I could not leave with nothing of you. And I have carried it for 2 years, and never told the living soul. And I think that is the true reason I could never quite stop hoping, because a woman who steals a man's queen has not entirely conceded the game. He laughed, a real laugh, helpless, 400 miles of grief breaking into it. And then he stopped laughing, and he reached out at last, not to take her hand, but to close her muddy fingers around the 2 white knights, his own hands over hers in the rain. And he said, Then marry me, and we shall have a complete set." "That," said Beatrice, "is the worst proposal I have ever heard, and my father once proposed to recover £30,000 with a single hand of Pharaoh." "It is a terrible proposal," he agreed. "But it is a proposal in which you never have to stand in a corner again, and I never have to walk into another room not knowing whether you'll be in it. I have weighed it against my other proposals, all of which I composed on horseback in the rain, and most of which involved the word forever used so often it lost all meaning. On reflection, this one seemed least likely to alarm the clergyman." "Yes," she said. He went very still. "Say that again." "You heard me. I've had a great deal of practice at saying things very quietly. Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I have loved you since the snow, you insufferable, sentimental 400-mile fool. Yes." And she pressed her muddy thumbnail into her finger out of 2 years' habit, and then, deliberately, fiercely, let herself laugh instead, out loud, in the rain, where anyone might see. There was, of course, the matter of Lady Ashby. A duke does not marry a clergyman's hired help out of a Highland garden without London noticing. And London noticed. And the noticing was not kind. Within a fortnight of the engagement's announcement, the drawing rooms had decided that Miss Beatrice Vane was an adventuress who had snared the Duke of Wexford under the very nose of her employer, and the unkindest voice in the chorus was the one that had the most to lose by it. Lady Ashby had 2 daughters yet to marry, and a story to protect. The story in which she had been deceived by a viper in her own household. And she told it well, in every drawing room that would have her, with the wounded dignity of a woman much imposed upon. But Lady Ashby, that beautiful, exact woman who read rooms, had a thing in her past that even Beatrice had not known, and Julian, who had spent 11 days learning to find people, had found it. She was alone when she let it show, though she did not know she was observed. It was at her own house, on an afternoon when she believed herself private, and Beatrice, who had come to collect the last of her things from the cold room at the top of the house under the Duke's protection, passed the half-open door of Lady Ashby's writing room, and saw, through the gap, what no one was meant to see. Lady Ashby was sitting at her desk, with a small object in her hand. Not a letter, not a ledger, but a child's coral teething ring, the kind a nursemaid buys, worn smooth with handling. She was turning it over and over with her thumb, the way a person turns a thing they cannot put down, and her beautiful face had come undone, in a way Beatrice had never seen it, soft and old, and stripped of all its exactness. Beatrice understood, without a word spoken, that there had been a child once, before the daughters, and that the child was the reason Lady Ashby guarded the living daughters' futures like a dragon over coin, and the reason she could not bear, would not bear, to watch a portionless woman gamble a household on love. Beatrice stayed where she was. After a moment, she stepped back from the door and walked on, and said nothing to anyone, because some things a person is not meant to have seen. The confrontation, when it came, was on Lady Ashby's ground, as such things are. She received Beatrice in her morning room, 3 days before the wedding, having summoned her with a note so cold it might have been carved. Beatrice came alone, against the Duke's wishes, because she had decided that whatever was owed between these 2 women would be settled by the women themselves. "You have done very well for yourself," Lady Ashby said. She did not rise. A duchess. From £40 a year. I confess I did not think you had it in you. I thought you genuinely meant to be invisible. Her mouth curled. It seems we were both performing. I never performed for you, my lady. I had no reason to. You had already decided what I was. And what were you? A woman who needed a roof. I am still her. The roof is grander now, that is all. Beatrice held the cold gaze without flinching, because she had stopped, somewhere on the road back from Inverness, being afraid of beautiful women who read rooms. You may go on telling London I deceived you. I cannot stop you, and a duchess's word and a slighted hostess's word will simply cancel. And your daughters will marry well regardless, because they are pretty and dowered, and you are formidable. But I came to say one thing to you, and then I will trouble you no further. You did not lose anything to me, Lady Ashby. The Duke was never going to marry Cassandra. He was never going to marry anyone but me, because he had been looking for me for 2 years before he ever set foot in your ballroom. You did not lose a Duke. You found one in your drawing room who was already lost to someone else, and you mistook the finding for a theft. Lady Ashby's hand moved, just slightly, toward the drawer of her writing desk. The drawer, Beatrice somehow knew, where a worn coral ring was kept, and then went still. For a long moment, the beautiful, exact face worked at something, and the something did not win. And Lady Ashby said, with the contempt drawn up like a shield, "You mistake your standing in this house, Vane. You always did. Now you have a grander house in which to mistake it. I wish you joy of it." She turned to the window. "You may see yourself out. You always knew the back stairs better than the front." It was a dismissal, and a cruel one, and Beatrice took it as the retreat it was, and saw herself out by the front stairs, because she was a duchess now, and did not need anyone's leave to use them. She did not expect to hear from Lady Ashby again. The wedding was small, by a duke's standards, which is to say there were only 200 people, and the breakfast ran to 9 courses, and the bishop officiated, and Beatrice wore a gown the colour of deep amber, because the Duke had said, the one time she let him choose anything, that he had spent 2 years remembering her in grey, and would like, for the rest of his life, to remember her in something the colour of firelight. She carried no chess pieces down the aisle, though both white knights and one stolen white queen travelled in a small velvet box in the carriage afterward, because some things go everywhere with a person now. She was wrong. Lady Ashby came in person, which cost her more than 100 posted parcels would have, and which was why she did it. It was as the last of the guests were taking their leave, Beatrice standing with her husband in the long drawing room of his townhouse, the word husband still so new in her mouth that she kept saying it silently to herself, like a coin she was afraid of dropping, that a footman announced, in a tone of some surprise, the dowager nobody had expected. Lady Ashby, who had not been invited, and who came across the emptying room in deep plum silk, with her chin high and her 2 daughters left pointedly at home. A woman walking into the territory of a household that had every reason to shut its doors to her. She did not stay long. She did not even sit. She crossed to the small table at Beatrice's elbow, set down upon it a flat object wrapped in linen, and stepped back, into Beatrice's space, on Beatrice's day, in Beatrice's husband's house, every inch of it the opposite of her own morning room ground. Beatrice picked it up and unwound the linen. Inside lay a chess piece, a black queen, very old, the lacquer worn at the crown from a thumb that had turned it a great many times, and folded beneath it a single sheet in the cold, exact hand she had last seen on a character reference, handed across a desk without a glance. She unfolded it. There was one line, and she read it aloud, because her husband was watching, and because the line deserved to be heard. A house needs a mistress who is not afraid to lose her queen to win the game. It was my mother's set, said Lady Ashby. Her voice was steady. The cost of the steadiness showed only in the line of her jaw. I have beaten a great many people with that queen, and protected a great many things I told myself were worth protecting. I find I do not want it any longer. I was wrong about you, Duchess, in the matter of your standing. I am told it is the fashion now to admit such things. A pause, the smallest crack in the exactness. Margaret tells me, she would not say from what, that she owes you a great deal. The Gars were always fonder of you than of me. I begin to understand why. It was the nearest thing to an apology a woman like Lady Ashby would ever frame, and it had cost her a public crossing of an unfriendly room and the surrender of her mother's queen. and Beatrice understood the size of it. "Thank you," Beatrice said simply, and closed her hand around the worn black piece. "I shall write to you, and I shall ask Cassandra and Margaret to dine. Whatever lies between us, the girls were never anything but kind to me, and a duchess can do that much." Lady Ashby inclined her head. Not the cold flick of the eyes that had dismissed a companion across a desk, but something slower, something that had a person in it, and turned and went out the way she had come, and the door closed, and she was gone. Julian took the worn black queen from his wife's open hand and turned it over in his fingers, and his eyebrows rose. "She has given you her mother's queen. We are now in possession of 2 white knights, 1 stolen white queen, and a black queen with a guilty conscience. At this rate we shall have a complete board by Michaelmas, assembled entirely from the wreckage of other people's regrets." "There was a child, Julian, before the daughters." Beatrice spoke quietly, watching the closed door. "I saw her with a coral teething ring once, and she thought herself alone. I think she has been afraid of love and what it costs ever since, and I think she gave up her own queen today, because it was the only way she had left to say she understood why I would risk everything to keep mine." "You," said the Duke, watching her, "are going to be a great deal of trouble as a wife. You forgive people I had quite looked forward to disliking on your behalf." "I've had 2 years' practice at being looked through," Beatrice said. "I find I have no appetite at all for doing it to anyone else, even her." He took her hand, the one with the worn black queen in it, the one with the faint old shadow of ink along the side that no amount of duchessing would ever quite scrub away. And he held it, and the carriage rolled west out of London, toward a house in the country where, he had promised her, there was a library, with a fire, and a chessboard older than either of them. A year and a half later, on a morning in early spring, the Duchess of Wexford was on her knees in a garden, her own garden this time, with mud to her wrists, planting lilac, because she had said once, in a snowbound taproom to a stranger she would not see for 2 years, that the only thing she missed about Hampshire was the lilac, and her husband had remembered it, as he remembered everything, and had ordered a whole hedge of it set along the south wall, where she could see it from the library window. She heard a horse on the gravel and did not look up, out of an old habit she had never entirely lost and had decided to keep, because it pleased him so unreasonably to come around the wall and find her not looking. "You," said the Duke of Wexford, coming around the low garden wall with his coat over his arm and the spring sun warm on the stone, "are extremely difficult to find, for a woman who lives in my house." "Companions are trained to be elusive." Beatrice sat back on her heels and shaded her eyes against the light, and she was smiling, and her hair had come down on one side and caught the sun and turned from brown to bronze, and there was earth on her cheek where she had pushed it back with a muddy hand. "It is the first thing they teach us. Disappear, and let your betters wonder where you've got to." He crossed the garden and lowered himself onto the wall beside her, careless of the Duke's breeches in the Duke's flower bed, and from his waistcoat pocket he produced a white chess knight and set it, with great ceremony, on the flat top of the wall between them, and beside it a white queen, and a black queen worn at the crown, until the 3 pieces stood in a small, bright row in the spring sun. "I came to inform you," he said, "that we are still 1 knight short of a complete set, and I have been thinking about how to acquire it, and I have a plan, and it is a terrible plan, and it involves us being snowed into a coaching inn in Derbyshire next winter, entirely on purpose, so that I may steal a horse from the innkeeper's board, the way you once stole my queen. And I should warn you I intend to carry it out, whether you approve or not." Beatrice took the white knight from the wall and turned it over in her muddy fingers, and the lilac was just coming out along the south wall, the first of it, green, purple, and sharp sweet on the spring air, exactly as she had described it to a stranger by a fire on the worst night of her life. The library window stood open behind them, and a fire burned in it, though the morning was warm, because her husband liked the smell of wood smoke, and she had long since stopped asking him to put it out. "It is the worst plan I have ever heard," she said, and pressed the small white horse into his palm and closed his fingers over it the way he had closed hers in the rain. While I hope, I breathe. Make the fire up, Julian. The lilac's out. I'll beat you at chess before supper.